Hey guys, tonight we're exploring a story that everyone in history should know. The story is ancient Roman discoveries that were proven wrong. You get comfortable, take a moment, like the video, and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Ancient Roman discoveries that were proven wrong. For centuries, ancient Rome has fascinated historians, archaeologists, and ordinary people alike. Every new excavation seems to promise another incredible revelation. A buried villa, a forgotten temple, a mysterious inscription, or a strange skeleton can instantly become international news. Headlines often declare that history has been rewritten. Museums proudly display newly discovered artifacts. Documentaries present dramatic reconstructions. Yet history is rarely that simple. One of the most fascinating aspects of archaeology is that discoveries do not always remain discoveries forever. Sometimes the first explanation turns out to be completely wrong. Sometimes a sensational claim collapses after better scientific testing. Sometimes an object believed to prove an extraordinary theory is eventually shown to have a much more ordinary explanation. Other times, generations of historians repeat an idea so often that it becomes accepted as fact, only for new evidence to reveal that the original conclusion was mistaken. Ancient Rome provides countless examples of this process. Because Roman civilization left behind millions of artifacts, thousands of buildings, and countless written records, scholars constantly re-examine old assumptions. New technologies such as DNA analysis, ground-penetrating radar, laser scanning, isotope testing, and advanced dating methods have transformed archaeology. These techniques allow researchers to ask questions that previous generations could never answer. As a result, many famous Roman discoveries that once seemed unquestionable have been challenged, revised, or completely overturned. This does not mean archaeologists were careless. On the contrary, science advances by correcting mistakes. Every generation builds upon the work of those before it. What seemed convincing 50 years ago may no longer survive modern analysis. That willingness to admit errors is one of archaeology's greatest strengths. One famous example involves Roman statues. For centuries, museums displayed beautiful white marble sculptures as examples of Roman artistic taste. People admired what they believed was the Roman preference for pure white stone. Artists during the Renaissance copied this appearance. Architects designed buildings inspired by what they imagined was Rome's elegant simplicity. Then scientists began examining microscopic traces of pigment that had survived on ancient statues. Using ultraviolet light, chemical analysis, and digital reconstruction, researchers discovered that many Roman sculptures had originally been painted in brilliant colors. Reds, blues, greens, yellows, gold leaf, and even detailed facial features once covered the marble surfaces. The image of a world filled with gleaming white statues was largely an illusion created by time. Paint simply disappeared over centuries of weathering, cleaning, and exposure. This discovery forced historians to rethink Roman aesthetics entirely. Many people resisted the idea, at first because brightly painted statues looked unfamiliar compared with the white marble they had admired their whole lives. Yet scientific evidence repeatedly confirmed that color was not the exception. It was often the rule. what appeared obvious for hundreds of years turned out to be one of history's biggest misconceptions. Another remarkable example concerns Roman concrete. For decades, researchers believed Roman builders accidentally created an exceptionally durable construction material that modern engineers struggled to reproduce. Ancient harbors remain standing after 2,000 years, while many modern concrete structures deteriorated within decades. The original explanation suggested that Roman concrete was simply made from volcanic ash mixed with lime, although this was partly correct. Newer research revealed that the process was far more sophisticated than previously believed. Scientists studying microscopic mineral structures discovered evidence that Roman builders intentionally used quicklime in ways that created tiny cracks, capable of repairing themselves when exposed to water. Rather than being flaws, these cracks actually allowed new minerals to grow, strengthening the structure over time. And so, instead of accidental engineering, the evidence increasingly suggested deliberate technological knowledge. This completely changed our understanding of Roman construction. The Romans were not simply lucky. They understood materials far better than historians once imagined. History is filled with similar surprises. Ancient skeletons, once identified as Roman soldiers, have later been recognized as civilians. Buildings believed to be temples have turned out to be administrative centers. Objects described as religious artifacts have later been identified as everyday household tools. Entire historical narratives have changed because of a single new excavation. One reason these mistakes occur is that archaeology rarely provides complete evidence. Imagine finding only a few pages from an enormous novel. You might understand some characters while misunderstanding the entire story. Archaeologists face similar challenges. Most ancient buildings have collapsed. Wood has rotted away. Metal has rusted. Cloth has disappeared. Only fragments survive. From those fragments, researchers attempt to reconstruct an entire civilization. Sometimes those reconstructions are remarkably accurate. Sometimes they are not. The excitement surrounding Roman discoveries often creates another problem. News organizations naturally prefer dramatic headlines. A mysterious object described as proof of a lost Roman technology attracts far more attention than a cautious statement saying, researchers continue studying an artifact with several possible interpretations. As a result, early theories sometimes become famous long before scientists finish investigating them. Years later, when new evidence disproves those ideas, the corrections receive far less publicity. The myth survives while the truth remains largely unknown. This pattern repeats throughout the history of Roman archaeology. Coins provide another fascinating example. Early historians often assumed coins discovered together represented hidden treasure buried during times of war. Modern research has shown that many so-called treasure hoards may actually have been ritual offerings, merchant savings, tax collections, or even accidental losses. The context surrounding the discovery matters just as much as the objects themselves. Without careful excavation, valuable information disappears forever. This is why modern archaeological techniques emphasize documenting every layer of soil before removing artifacts. Earlier excavations sometimes focused primarily on recovering impressive objects. Today, archaeologists know that even tiny fragments of pollen, seeds, charcoal, animal bones, and soil chemistry can reveal extraordinary details about Roman life. Sometimes the smallest discovery overturns the biggest theory. Ancient Rome itself was enormous. Its empire stretched across Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East. People living under Roman rule spoke different languages, practiced different religions, and followed different traditions. Because of this diversity, archaeologists must be extremely careful not to assume that one discovery represents the entire empire. A burial custom common in Britain might never have existed in Egypt. A building style popular in Spain might be completely absent in Syria. Yet earlier historians often generalized from limited evidence. Modern archaeology increasingly recognizes the complexity of Roman civilization. This shift has overturned countless older interpretations. Perhaps the greatest lesson is that history is never truly finished. Every excavation has the potential to challenge ideas accepted for generations. Every new scientific technique opens another window into the past. Every mistaken conclusion teaches researchers how to ask better questions. Instead of seeing corrections as failures, historians view them as progress. The real story of ancient Rome becomes clearer not because people never make mistakes, but because they continue testing old assumptions against new evidence. That relentless search for truth is what makes archaeology one of the most exciting sciences in the world. The ruins of ancient Rome still have countless secrets hidden beneath layers of earth. Some discoveries waiting underground may confirm long-held beliefs. Others may completely overturn everything we think we know today. And that possibility is exactly what keeps archaeologists digging. One of the greatest challenges in understanding ancient Rome is separating evidence from assumption. Every artifact tells a story, but only if that story is interpreted correctly. Throughout the last 2 centuries, archaeologists have repeatedly discovered that some of their earliest conclusions were shaped more by modern expectations than by Roman reality. As new methods emerged, many famous discoveries had to be reconsidered. A perfect example comes from one of the Roman world's most recognizable landmarks, the amphitheater. For generations, people believed that nearly every Roman amphitheater was built primarily for gladiatorial combat. School books, films, and documentaries reinforce the image of thousands of spectators gathering almost every week to watch men fight to the death. Excavations certainly confirmed that gladiator contests took place. Ancient writers described them in detail, and inscriptions recorded the names of the famous fighters. Yet archaeologists gradually realized that this popular image oversimplified the purpose of these enormous structures. Evidence from seating arrangements, inscriptions, graffiti, and maintenance records showed that amphitheaters hosted many different events: public executions, animal hunts, military reenactments, athletic competitions, religious ceremonies, political celebrations, and even public announcements all took place inside these arenas. Some amphitheaters were used far less frequently than historians once imagined, while others served as important civic gathering places rather than constant centers of bloodshed. The discovery did not prove that gladiator games never happened. Instead, it corrected the mistaken belief that every amphitheater existed for one single purpose. Roman cities invested huge sums in these buildings because they fulfilled many social, political, and cultural roles. Another long-standing misconception involved Roman roads. For centuries, historians repeated the famous phrase, "All roads lead to Rome," almost as if every road in the empire had been designed with the capital as its destination. Early maps seemed to support this idea, portraying Rome as the unquestioned center of an immense transportation network. Modern archaeological surveys painted a far more complicated picture, and many Roman roads connected nearby towns without passing anywhere near Rome. Others linked military forts, mining districts, ports, agricultural regions, or frontier defenses. The network was designed for practical administration across an enormous empire, rather than as a symbolic web focused only on the capital. Satellite imagery, aerial photography, and laser scanning revealed thousands of local routes that had previously gone unnoticed beneath forests and farmland. These discoveries demonstrated that Roman engineers planned transportation according to geography, trade, military needs, and local economies. The romantic image remained memorable, but reality proved much more practical. Perhaps no Roman discovery has generated more public fascination than Pompeii. When excavations began centuries ago, many believed the city represented an untouched snapshot of everyday Roman life, frozen forever beneath volcanic ash. This interpretation appeared almost miraculous. Homes still contained furniture, shops remained stocked, paintings decorated walls, tools lay where workers had left them. Human remains seemed to capture people's final moments. For years, museums presented Pompeii as though time had stopped instantly. Yet modern research complicated this picture. Archaeologists found increasing evidence that many residents escaped before the deadliest stages of the eruption. Valuable possessions had been removed from numerous houses. Doors had been forced open after the disaster by looters searching for buried treasures. Some buildings had already suffered earthquake damage months earlier and were under repair when Mount Vesuvius erupted. Instead of preserving one perfectly ordinary day in Roman history, Pompeii represented a city experiencing crisis, evacuation, destruction, and later disturbance. The discovery forced historians to use greater caution when describing Pompeii as a perfect time capsule. Another mistaken interpretation involved Roman household shrines. Small decorated spaces found inside homes were once identified almost automatically as simple family altars devoted to domestic gods. This explanation appeared reasonable because Roman writers described household worship. Archaeologists therefore assumed nearly every small niche or decorated corner served the same religious purpose. Closer examination suggested otherwise. Some spaces had been modified repeatedly over generations. Others stored valuable objects rather than religious offerings. Certain niches may have displayed family portraits, honored deceased relatives, or functioned as symbols of household identity instead of active places of worship. The discovery reminded historians that similar-looking spaces could serve very different functions depending on the family, region, and historical period. Ancient Rome was never as culturally uniform as earlier scholars imagined. Even Roman helmets became the subject of surprising revisions. 19th century historians often reconstructed Roman soldiers wearing identical equipment across the empire. Museums displayed rows of nearly identical armor, shields, and helmets, creating the impression of perfect military standardization. Modern excavations challenged this assumption. Helmets recovered from Britain differed from those found along the Danube. Local workshops introduced regional styles. Soldiers repaired damaged equipment using available materials. Auxiliary units recruited from different cultures sometimes retained elements of their traditional military dress. The Roman army remained highly organized, but archaeological evidence revealed far greater diversity than earlier reconstructions suggested. Instead of millions of identical soldiers marching across Europe, the empire fielded an army that balanced standard military requirements with local adaptation. Even Roman bathhouses produced unexpected surprises. Early excavators often assumed every room inside bath complexes served bathing purposes. As additional buildings were uncovered, researchers identified libraries, lecture halls, exercise courts, gardens, dining areas, shops, administrative offices, and meeting rooms connected to many bathhouses. The baths were not simply places to get clean. They functioned as community centers where people exercised, conducted business, read literature, attended lectures, met friends, discussed politics, and relaxed. Once again, archaeology transformed a simple picture into a much richer understanding of Roman daily life. These corrections illustrate an important principle. History rarely changes because someone discovers a spectacular golden treasure. More often it changes because hundreds of small discoveries slowly accumulate until an older explanation no longer fits the evidence. A broken piece of pottery, a forgotten inscription, a microscopic grain of pollen, a chemical residue inside an ancient jar, each may seem insignificant by itself. Together, they can completely rewrite history. That process continues today. Every excavation across the former Roman Empire adds another piece to an enormous puzzle that is still far from complete. The more evidence archaeologists uncover, the more they realize that ancient Rome was even more diverse, adaptable, and complex than previous generations believed. And with every mistaken discovery corrected, historians come one step closer to understanding what life in the Roman world was really like. If there is one lesson that archaeology teaches over and over again, it is that first impressions can be dangerously misleading. Ancient Roman discoveries often appear straightforward when they emerge from the ground, but appearances rarely tell the whole story. An object that seems obvious today may receive a completely different interpretation tomorrow, after years of careful research. One remarkable example involves Roman villas. For much of the 19th and early 20th centuries, archaeologists believed that every large Roman villa represented the luxurious home of a wealthy aristocrat. Massive buildings with beautiful mosaics, elaborate courtyards, and heated rooms seemed to fit perfectly with the image of rich Roman landowners enjoying lives of comfort. The theory appeared convincing because some ancient writers described magnificent country estates owned by senators and powerful officials. As more villas were excavated across Britain, Gaul, Germany, Spain, and North Africa, however, researchers noticed something unusual. Many villas did not resemble private mansions at all. Some contained large workshops filled with industrial equipment. Others included wine presses, olive mills, pottery kilns, metalworking areas, warehouses, and extensive farming facilities. A number of sites showed clear evidence that hundreds of workers lived and labored there throughout the year. Instead of serving only as luxurious residences, many Roman villas functioned as complex agricultural and industrial businesses. Some were effectively the ancient equivalent of large commercial estates, producing goods for markets across the empire. The old assumption that every villa was simply a rich family's country home proved far too simplistic. Another fascinating correction involved Roman mosaics. For generations, historians believed these colorful floor decorations existed mainly to display wealth. Wealthy homeowners commissioned expensive mosaics because they wanted to impress visitors. There was certainly truth in this idea. Yet closer examination revealed that many mosaics communicated far more than financial status. Certain patterns appeared only in dining rooms. Others decorated bathhouses. Some depicted myths associated with hospitality. Others displayed symbols believed to bring good fortune or protect the household. Geometric designs sometimes guided visitors through different parts of a building. Rather than serving merely as decoration, mosaics often reflected the purpose of the room, the identity of the owner, religious beliefs, or cultural traditions. Their meaning depended heavily on context. This realization transformed how archaeologists interpreted Roman homes. One of the biggest surprises came from Roman medicine. For many years, collections of ancient surgical instruments were presented as proof that Roman doctors regularly performed highly advanced operations similar to modern surgery. The instruments looked impressive. Scalpels, forceps, hooks, needles, bone drills. To modernize, they resembled the equipment found in today's operating rooms. Early historians therefore assumed Roman surgery was surprisingly sophisticated. Modern medical historians approached the evidence more cautiously. Some instruments once identified as surgical tools were actually used for cosmetics, crafts, dentistry, or preparing medicines. Others may have served several purposes. Written medical texts suggested that, although Roman physicians possessed considerable skill, many dangerous procedures remained extremely rare because infections, pain, and limited knowledge made successful outcomes uncertain. The instruments themselves were genuine. The exaggerated claims about their routine use, however, required significant revision. Another discovery that changed dramatically involved Roman children. Early archaeology focused almost entirely on emperors, generals, soldiers, temples, and monuments. Children received comparatively little attention. Many historians even concluded that Roman society showed relatively little interest in childhood because so few toys had been identified. As excavations became more detailed, this picture changed completely. Small dolls carved from wood and ivory emerged from graves. Miniature carts, tiny animal figurines, balls made from leather, dice, gaming pieces, writing tablets used for education, children's shoes, baby feeding vessels. These discoveries demonstrated that children occupied a far more visible place in Roman society than earlier researchers believed. The problem had never been their absence. Archaeologists simply had not recognized many of the objects associated with childhood. Ancient garbage dumps provided another major correction. For decades, refuse pits attracted relatively little attention. Excavators naturally concentrated on temples, palaces, statues, and valuable artifacts. Garbage appeared unimportant. Modern archaeology completely reversed that attitude. Discarded food remains revealed Roman diets. Broken pottery showed patterns of trade. Animal bones demonstrated changing agricultural practices. Seeds preserved evidence of imported plants. Fish bones identified long-distance commerce. Even parasite eggs preserved in ancient waste helped scientists understand Roman health. Ironically, some of the least glamorous discoveries produced some of the most valuable historical information. Sometimes history survives best in what people threw away. Another mistaken belief concerned Roman frontier walls. Structures like Hadrian's Wall were once viewed primarily as gigantic defensive barriers designed to stop invading armies. This interpretation seemed obvious. A wall separates one side from another. Surely its purpose was defense. Archaeological evidence complicated that explanation. Numerous gates crossed the walls. Military forts lined both sides. Trade continued through controlled crossings. Merchants, officials, travelers, and local communities regularly moved across these frontiers. The walls certainly provided military protection, but they also controlled taxation, migration, customs inspections, administration, and communication. Rather than functioning as impenetrable barriers, they acted as carefully managed borders. The discovery changed how historians understood Roman frontier policy. Control often mattered more than complete exclusion. Perhaps one of the most dramatic revisions involved Roman mining. Earlier historians viewed ancient mining operations as primitive by modern standards. Large-scale excavations across Spain, Romania, Britain, and other provinces revealed astonishing engineering achievements. Entire mountains had been reshaped. Sophisticated drainage systems removed groundwater. Aqueducts delivered enormous quantities of water for hydraulic mining. Complex ventilation systems supplied underground tunnels. The sheer scale of Roman mining surprised researchers. Ancient engineers possessed organizational abilities far beyond earlier estimates. Instead of small groups digging randomly for minerals, massive industrial operations employed thousands of workers under careful supervision. This realization forced historians to reconsider the economic power of the Roman Empire. Its industries were larger, more efficient, and more technologically advanced than previously imagined. Each corrected discovery reminds us that archaeology is never static. The past does not change. Our understanding of it does. As new scientific techniques continue to develop, objects that have sat quietly inside museums for generations may reveal entirely new secrets. A faded inscription may become readable. Ancient DNA may identify forgotten populations. Chemical analysis may uncover hidden trade networks. Laser scanning may expose buried cities beneath forests or farmland. Every new discovery has the potential to overturn another long-held belief. That is what makes the study of ancient Rome so endlessly fascinating. Even after 2,000 years, the Roman world still refuses to give up all of its secrets. The story of ancient Rome is often presented as a collection of unquestionable facts. Powerful emperors ruled vast territories. Mighty legions conquered distant lands. Brilliant engineers built roads, bridges, aqueducts, and cities that lasted for centuries. While much of this is true, archaeology has repeatedly shown that many smaller details once accepted without question were based on incomplete evidence. One of the most surprising examples involves Roman dining. For generations, historians believed wealthy Romans almost always ate while reclining on couches. Paintings, sculptures, and literary descriptions seemed to support this image. It became one of the most recognizable symbols of Roman luxury. As more houses were excavated across the empire, however, archaeologists discovered that reality was much more varied. Many dining rooms contained ordinary seating arrangements. Some homes lacked the traditional couches altogether. In smaller towns and rural areas, families often gathered around simple wooden tables, much like people throughout history. Even among the wealthy, reclining appears to have been reserved for certain formal occasions rather than every meal. The famous image of Romans lying on couches while servants brought endless courses of food represented only one part of Roman society. It did not describe how millions of ordinary Romans actually lived. Another long-held belief concerned Roman markets. Early excavators frequently identified any large open square surrounded by buildings as a marketplace. The reasoning seemed straightforward. Open spaces must have been places where merchants sold goods. Later research challenged that assumption. Some of these squares were political gathering places. Others hosted religious festivals. Some served as military assembly areas. A number functioned as public meeting spaces where citizens discussed legal matters or listened to official announcements. Markets certainly existed, but archaeologists learned that open public spaces often had multiple purposes depending on the day, season, or local traditions. This discovery highlighted the flexibility of Roman urban life. Cities were not divided into strictly separate zones the way many modern cities are. A single location might host trade in the morning, political speeches in the afternoon, and religious ceremonies during festivals. Roman writing tablets produced another remarkable correction. Thousands of wooden tablets have survived in waterlogged conditions, especially at military sites such as Vindolanda in Britain. When many of these tablets were first discovered, historians assumed they contained official military reports, orders, and administrative records. After careful translation, researchers found something quite different. Many tablets contained birthday invitations, shopping lists, personal letters, requests for warm clothing, family news, complaints about supplies, friendly jokes, accounts of daily expenses. Instead of revealing only the machinery of the Roman army, these documents exposed the ordinary lives of people who lived nearly 2,000 years ago. Soldiers worried about cold weather. Officers invited friends to dinner. Families exchanged greetings. Children were mentioned with affection. The discovery transformed our understanding of Roman military communities. These were not merely machines of war, they were living societies filled with ordinary human relationships. Another mistaken interpretation involved Roman cemeteries. Earlier archaeologists often believed that elaborate graves always belonged to the richest members of society. The assumption appeared logical. More expensive tombs suggested greater wealth. Modern analysis complicated this idea. Some relatively modest individuals received impressive burials because of military honors, religious status, or local traditions. Meanwhile, certain wealthy Romans chose surprisingly simple graves. In some regions, cultural customs influenced burial styles more strongly than economic status. This meant archaeologists could no longer judge social class solely by the appearance of a tomb. Burial practices reflected a complex combination of wealth, religion, family tradition, local identity, and personal preference. Glassware also challenged earlier assumptions. Beautiful Roman glass vessels discovered in tombs were initially regarded as luxury objects owned only by elites. As excavations expanded, archaeologists recovered glass containers from ordinary homes, workshops, and small villages. Evidence suggested that improvements in Roman glass production eventually made many items affordable for much broader sections of society. While exceptional pieces remained expensive, ordinary glass became surprisingly common. This discovery revealed an economy capable of large-scale manufacturing and widespread distribution. The Roman world was not only a society of luxury for the rich, but also one in which many everyday goods reached ordinary people. Perhaps one of the most fascinating corrections involved Roman graffiti. For many years, graffiti scratched onto walls received little scholarly attention. Researchers often dismissed it as meaningless vandalism. As specialists began studying these inscriptions carefully, an entirely different picture emerged. People wrote jokes, poems, political opinions, business advertisements, love messages, sporting rivalries, personal insults, mathematical calculations, school exercises, religious prayers, election slogans. Some graffiti even preserved conversations, with one writer responding to another days or weeks later. Rather than being worthless damage, these markings became one of the richest sources for understanding the voices of ordinary Romans. Unlike official monuments, graffiti captured spontaneous thoughts from everyday people. It revealed humor, frustration, ambition, affection, and personality in ways formal inscriptions rarely could. One of the greatest lessons from these discoveries is that history often becomes more human as new evidence appears. Early archaeology naturally emphasized emperors, victories, monumental architecture, and famous battles. Modern archaeology increasingly focuses on farmers, merchants, craftsmen, women, children, slaves, soldiers, travelers, and families. This shift has corrected countless misconceptions. Ancient Rome was not built only by emperors. It was sustained by millions of ordinary people whose stories remained hidden for centuries beneath layers of soil. Every broken cup, every worn sandal, every child's toy, every shopping list, every forgotten letter, every scratched message on a wall adds another small piece to the enormous puzzle. And sometimes those tiny pieces overturn ideas that historians once believed were beyond question. That is why archaeology remains one of the most exciting ways to study the ancient world. Every excavation reminds us that history is never completely settled. There is always another mystery waiting beneath the ground. There is always another assumption waiting to be challenged. And somewhere beneath the ruins of the Roman Empire, another discovery may already be waiting to prove historians wrong once again. Few civilizations have been studied as intensely as ancient Rome. For more than 500 years, scholars have examined its ruins, translated its texts, and debated its history. One might expect that, after so much research, there would be very little left to discover. Yet the opposite has proven true. The more archaeologists uncover, the more they realize that many early conclusions were influenced by limited evidence, outdated methods, or assumptions that seemed reasonable at the time. One area where this became especially clear was Roman religion. For many years, historians believed the Roman Empire followed a relatively uniform religious system. Temples dedicated to Jupiter, Mars, Venus, and other well-known gods appeared across the empire, creating the impression that people worshipped in much the same way from Britain to Egypt. As archaeologists excavated more provincial towns and villages, that picture began to change. Many temples combined Roman architecture with local traditions. In Gaul, Celtic gods appeared alongside Roman deities. In Egypt, Roman citizens continued honoring ancient Egyptian gods while also participating in Roman ceremonies. Along the eastern frontier, Greek, Syrian, and Persian religious influences blended together in unexpected ways. Rather than replacing local beliefs, Roman religion often absorbed them. This discovery forced historians to abandon the older idea of a single, standardized religious system. The Roman Empire was culturally flexible, and its religious life reflected that diversity. Another misconception involved Roman literacy. Earlier generations assumed that only senators, wealthy merchants, and government officials could read and write. Since surviving literature came mostly from educated elites, this conclusion appeared logical. Then archaeologists uncovered increasing numbers of everyday inscriptions. Potters stamped their names onto ceramics, merchants labeled shipments, soldiers wrote letters home, children practiced the alphabet on wax tablets, shopkeepers recorded debts, construction workers carved measurements into stone. Even simple graffiti demonstrated that many ordinary people possessed at least basic literacy. This did not mean every Roman could read. Far from it. But literacy was far more widespread than historians had once believed. Writing played a much larger role in everyday Roman life than earlier generations imagined. Roman kitchens also produced surprising discoveries. For decades, excavators identified certain ceramic vessels as ceremonial objects because of their unusual shapes. Later chemical analysis revealed traces of olive oil, fish sauce, wine, herbs, grains, and animal fats. Many so-called ritual containers were actually cooking utensils or food storage jars. The mistake occurred because earlier archaeologists focused mainly on appearance. Modern science examined what had once been inside the vessels. Those invisible chemical residues transformed ordinary pottery into evidence of ancient cooking techniques. Researchers even reconstructed recipes based on microscopic food remains preserved inside Roman cookware. The kitchen, once overlooked, became one of archaeology's richest sources of information. Another famous correction involved Roman coins bearing the faces of emperors. For generations, historians believed these portraits represented realistic images of each ruler. The assumption seemed obvious. After all, why place an inaccurate face on official currency? Modern studies suggested otherwise. Many imperial portraits followed artistic conventions rather than strict realism. Some emperors deliberately appeared younger than their actual age. Others emphasized strength, wisdom, or divine authority. After political changes, portraits could even be altered to resemble previous respected rulers. Coins functioned as political messages as much as financial instruments. They promoted carefully constructed public images rather than photographic accuracy. This realization changed how historians interpreted Roman portraiture. Art often served politics. Accuracy was sometimes less important than symbolism. Roman military camps revealed another mistaken assumption. Earlier excavations portrayed camps as rigid, identical fortresses built according to one universal plan. As more sites were discovered across Europe and the Middle East, archaeologists noticed considerable variation. Mountain terrain required different layouts than open plains. Temporary marching camps differed from permanent frontier forts. Local building materials influenced construction methods. Some forts expanded gradually over decades, while others were rebuilt several times after fires or attacks. The Roman army certainly valued organization, but practical adaptation proved just as important. This flexibility helped explain how Roman forces successfully operated across vastly different environments. One particularly fascinating discovery concerned Roman pets. Ancient texts often discussed hunting dogs and working animals, leading historians to believe pets held only practical value. Archaeological evidence challenged that idea. Small dogs received careful burials. Cats appeared in household art. Bird cages survived in wealthy homes.
Pet collars carried affectionate inscriptions. One famous collar reportedly bore a message asking anyone who found the dog to return it safely. Animal skeletons sometimes rested beside their owners. These discoveries revealed emotional bonds remarkably familiar to modern people. Romans mourned beloved animals. They cared for them. They named them. They remembered them. The image of a society concerned only with utility gave way to a much more personal understanding of daily life. Even Roman clothing underwent major revision. Classical statues showed graceful white garments, draped elegantly over the body. Early historians imagined that Roman clothing was generally plain and colorless. Scientific examination of surviving textile fragments and dye residues proved otherwise. Bright reds, deep blues, golden yellows, rich purples, vivid greens. Color played an important role in Roman fashion. Some dyes were extremely expensive and signaled social status. Others were widely available. Decorative borders, embroidery, and patterned fabrics appeared far more frequently than earlier reconstructions suggested. The familiar image of Romans, dressed almost entirely in white, reflected artistic conventions and the fading of pigments over time rather than historical reality. Each of these corrections reminds us that archaeology is not simply about finding ancient objects. It is about learning how to ask better questions. An artifact rarely speaks for itself. Its meaning depends on careful investigation, comparison, scientific testing, and a willingness to reconsider old ideas. What one generation confidently labels a ceremonial object may later become an ordinary kitchen tool. What appears to be evidence of wealth may instead reveal local tradition. What seems obvious today may become tomorrow's greatest historical misconception. Ancient Rome continues to surprise us because every discovery has the power to challenge assumptions that once appeared unquestionable. The deeper archaeologists dig into the Roman past, the clearer it becomes that history is not a fixed story, carved forever in stone. It is an ongoing investigation, one that grows richer, more accurate, and more fascinating with every new piece of evidence brought into the light. History often seems permanent. Once an idea appears in textbooks, museums, and documentaries, it can remain accepted for generations. Yet archaeology has a remarkable habit of reminding us that certainty is often temporary. Ancient Rome offers countless examples where discoveries that once seemed conclusive eventually proved incomplete or entirely mistaken. One of the most interesting cases involved Roman water systems. For decades, historians admired the empire's magnificent aqueducts and believed they supplied nearly all Roman communities with fresh water. These towering stone structures became symbols of Roman engineering genius, and many people assumed every important city depended primarily on aqueducts. As excavations expanded across the former empire, archaeologists discovered a far more complex picture. Many towns relied heavily on wells that reached underground water sources. Others collected rainwater in enormous underground cisterns. Rural communities often depended on nearby springs or rivers rather than expensive aqueducts. Even in cities with famous aqueducts, the system was only one part of a much larger network that included reservoirs, fountains, storage tanks, lead pipes, ceramic pipes, and drainage channels. The discovery corrected a common misunderstanding. Aqueducts were spectacular achievements, but they were not the only solution the Romans used to manage water. Roman engineers adapted their methods
to local geography, climate, and available resources. And another mistaken belief centered on Roman farming. Earlier historians often imagined Roman agriculture as relatively simple. Large estates produced grain, olives, and grapes, while small farmers worked nearby fields using traditional methods. Modern archaeology revealed far greater sophistication. Excavations uncovered advanced irrigation systems, carefully designed drainage networks, crop rotation practices, specialized storage facilities, and evidence of selective breeding for livestock. Pollen analysis showed that Roman farmers cultivated a remarkable variety of crops depending on regional conditions. Seeds recovered from archaeological sites demonstrated the movement of plants across thousands of kilometers. Certain fruits, vegetables, and herbs spread through trade networks that connected distant provinces. The Roman countryside turned out to be far more innovative than earlier generations believed. One particularly surprising discovery involved Roman women. For many years, historical narratives focused almost exclusively on men. Emperors, senators, generals, and soldiers dominated the written record. As a result, archaeologists initially assumed that women rarely played significant public or economic roles. Excavated inscriptions gradually challenged that assumption. Women appeared as business owners, priestesses, property managers, craft producers, patrons of public buildings, benefactors who financed local construction projects. Some managed family estates after the deaths of their husbands. Others controlled workshops that produced pottery, textiles, or luxury goods. Legal documents and inscriptions revealed women participating in economic life far more actively than earlier historians had recognized. Although Roman society remained deeply patriarchal, the archaeological evidence painted a more complex picture than traditional accounts suggested. Another famous misconception involved Roman food. For generations, popular books portrayed Roman banquets as endless displays of extravagance, where guests constantly consumed exotic delicacies. Stories of flamingos, peacocks, dormice, and other unusual dishes became legendary. While such meals certainly existed among the wealthiest elites, archaeological evidence suggested they were exceptional rather than typical. Analysis of food remains from ordinary homes revealed diets centered on bread, vegetables, beans, lentils, cheese, fish, olive oil, fruit, and occasional meat. Animal bones showed that pork was common in many regions, while beef appeared less frequently than once believed. Grain remained the foundation of daily nutrition for much of the population. The discovery reminded historians that spectacular banquets, described by ancient writers, represented extraordinary occasions rather than everyday reality. Another area transformed by modern research was Roman trade. Earlier maps emphasized famous trade routes across the Mediterranean. Recent underwater archaeology expanded that picture dramatically. Hundreds of shipwrecks preserved cargoes of pottery, wine, olive oil, marble, glass, metals, spices, and luxury goods. Each wreck provided a snapshot of commerce at a particular moment. Together, they revealed an astonishingly interconnected economy. Goods traveled enormous distances. Spanish olive oil reached Britain, Egyptian grain fed Rome, glass from the eastern Mediterranean appeared in northern Europe. African pottery reached Italy. Instead of isolated regional economies, the Roman Empire operated through an extensive commercial network that linked 3 continents.
This understanding grew not from one spectacular discovery, but from decades of underwater exploration. One of the greatest corrections concerned Roman housing. Early excavations concentrated on large villas and impressive public buildings. This focus unintentionally created the impression that Romans generally lived in spacious stone houses. Later excavations within crowded cities revealed a different reality. Many ordinary Romans lived in apartment buildings known as insulae. Some rose several stories high. Rooms could be cramped, poorly ventilated, and vulnerable to fire. Water supplies varied. Cooking often occurred in shared spaces. Families rented rather than owned their homes. The contrast between elite villas and urban apartments demonstrated the enormous social differences within Roman society. The magnificent residences, preserved for centuries, represented only a small percentage of the population. Perhaps one of the most remarkable examples of changing interpretations involved Roman inscriptions. For years, damaged inscriptions were reconstructed using educated guesses based on familiar phrases. Modern imaging technology, including reflectance transformation imaging and multispectral photography, allowed scholars to detect letters invisible to the naked eye. Entire words emerged from surfaces once believed unreadable. Names changed, dates changed, official titles changed. In some cases, historical events had to be reinterpreted because newly visible letters completely altered the meaning of an inscription. These discoveries showed that even artifacts displayed in museums for generations could still reveal new information. Technology continued expanding the limits of archaeology. Every improvement in imaging, chemistry, genetics, and digital analysis opened another door into the Roman past.
The greatest lesson was not that earlier scholars lacked intelligence. They worked with the tools available to them. Modern researchers simply possess methods that previous generations could never have imagined. Because of that, ancient Rome remains a living field of discovery. Every excavation raises new questions. Every scientific breakthrough challenges old assumptions. Every corrected interpretation brings historians a little closer to understanding one of history's greatest civilizations as it truly was, not as people once imagined it to be. As archaeology has become more scientific, historians have learned an important lesson. The most convincing explanation is not always the correct one. Ancient Roman discoveries have repeatedly shown that evidence can be misunderstood when viewed through the assumptions of a different age. Every generation brings new questions, and with those questions often come surprising answers. One of the most fascinating examples involves Roman roads buried beneath modern landscapes. For centuries, many historians believed that the Roman road network had already been almost completely identified. Ancient maps, surviving milestones, and visible stone roads appeared to provide a fairly complete picture. Then modern technology changed everything. Airborne laser scanning, better known as LiDAR, allowed archaeologists to examine the ground beneath forests without cutting down a single tree. By removing vegetation digitally, researchers suddenly began seeing long-forgotten roads hidden beneath woodland that had remained untouched for hundreds of years. Satellite imagery added even more discoveries. Faint lines across farmland, nearly invisible from the ground, revealed ancient routes that had disappeared beneath centuries of agriculture. Some roads historians believed had ended abruptly were found to continue for many more kilometers. Others connected settlements
that scholars had never thought were directly linked. The discovery proved that the Roman transportation network was larger and more flexible than earlier maps suggested. It also demonstrated that even landscapes studied for generations could still conceal remarkable surprises. Another famous misunderstanding involved Roman fortifications. When archaeologists first uncovered massive stone walls around ancient cities, they naturally assumed these defenses had been built to repel enemy invasions. That explanation seemed perfectly reasonable. However, detailed analysis of construction dates produced unexpected results. Some walls were erected during periods of relative peace. Others surrounded cities facing little immediate military danger. Researchers gradually realized that city walls served multiple purposes. They projected political authority. They defined civic identity. They controlled trade through gates. They demonstrated wealth and prestige. Of course, they also provided protection during times of conflict, but defense alone no longer explained every wall. The meaning of these structures became far more complex. One remarkable correction concerned Roman jewelry. Early museum collections often displayed necklaces, rings, bracelets, and brooches as simple examples of ancient fashion. Recent research revealed that many pieces carried deeper significance. Certain gemstones were believed to provide protection. Specific symbols represented religious beliefs. Amulets were worn to ward off illness or bad luck. Military families sometimes exchanged jewelry as personal reminders during long deployments. Children often wore protective pendants. What appeared to be ordinary decoration sometimes functioned as deeply meaningful personal possessions. The discovery reminded historians that objects often carry emotional value invisible to modern observers. Roman pottery also produced surprising revisions. For decades, archaeologists classified pottery mainly according to its appearance. Bowls, jars, plates, cups. Each received a descriptive category. Chemical residue analysis transformed that approach. Scientists detected traces of olive oil, wine, honey, dairy products, perfumes, medicinal plants, fish sauce, wax, and even cosmetics preserved within microscopic pores of ceramic vessels. Containers that looked nearly identical sometimes held completely different substances. As a result, archaeologists realized that appearance alone could not determine an object's purpose. Laboratory science revealed stories hidden beyond the reach of the human eye. Another misconception involved Roman military victory monuments. Large triumphal arches were once viewed simply as celebrations of successful campaigns. Closer examination showed they also functioned as political propaganda. Many arches emphasized victories while carefully ignoring costly defeats. Some exaggerated the importance of certain battles. Others linked emperors to military successes achieved largely by their generals. Inscriptions highlighted loyalty, divine favor, and imperial authority. The monuments told carefully crafted stories designed to strengthen political legitimacy. Rather than serving as completely objective historical records, they reflected the messages rulers wanted future generations to remember. This realization encouraged historians to compare archaeological evidence with written accounts more critically. One of the greatest changes in Roman archaeology came through the study of ancient diseases. Earlier historians relied mainly on written descriptions of epidemics. Today, scientists can examine ancient skeletons for evidence of illness. DNA recovered from teeth has identified pathogens responsible for some ancient outbreaks. Bone analysis reveals long-term nutritional deficiencies. Microscopic examination shows healed injuries, infections, arthritis, and occupational stress. These discoveries corrected numerous assumptions. Certain diseases once believed common in Roman times proved surprisingly rare. Others thought to be uncommon appeared much more widespread. The physical remains of ordinary people often told a different story from literary sources written by elite authors. Roman prisons also underwent significant reinterpretation. Early excavators identified underground rooms with iron fittings as prisons almost automatically. Later research questioned several of these conclusions. Some structures identified as prisons were actually storage facilities. Others functioned as water cisterns before being reused for different purposes. Still, others may have served military or administrative roles. This demonstrated how easily assumptions could become accepted when evidence remained incomplete. Archaeologists increasingly emphasized caution before assigning definite functions to ancient buildings. One discovery that fascinated both historians and the public involved Roman writing materials. For generations, people imagined that Roman books consisted almost entirely of scrolls. Ancient art certainly depicted scrolls frequently. Excavations, however, revealed increasing evidence for early codices, collections of pages bound together in a form resembling modern books. Although scrolls remained common, codices appeared earlier and more widely than historians once believed. Their practical advantages made them increasingly popular. This discovery helped explain how written knowledge evolved during the final centuries of the Roman Empire. Perhaps the most important lesson from all these corrected discoveries is that archaeology is not a search for certainty. It is a search for understanding. Every object recovered from the earth represents only one piece of a much larger puzzle. Without context, even spectacular discoveries can be misunderstood. A golden ring may reveal less than a broken cooking pot. A forgotten shopping list may transform history more than an emperor's statue. The Roman world was unimaginably complex. It stretched across deserts, mountains, forests, islands, and fertile plains. It included hundreds of cultures, languages, traditions, and ways of life. No single discovery can ever explain it completely. That is why archaeology remains an ongoing conversation rather than a finished story. Every generation asks new questions, every excavation uncovers new evidence, and every answer brings historians one step closer to understanding the true complexity of ancient Rome. The deeper archaeologists dig into the history of ancient Rome, the more they realize that some of the biggest misunderstandings were created not by a lack of intelligence, but by a lack of evidence. Every generation inherited only a fraction of the Roman world. Broken walls, shattered pottery, damaged inscriptions, and scattered human remains forced historians to fill enormous gaps with educated guesses. Sometimes those guesses proved remarkably accurate. Other times they were completely overturned by later discoveries. One of the most revealing examples involved Roman workshops. For many years, archaeologists believed that craftsmen usually worked in separate industrial districts located away from residential neighborhoods. This idea seemed logical because industries such as metalworking, pottery production, and leather tanning could be noisy, smoky, and unpleasant. As excavations became more detailed, however,
researchers discovered workshops built directly into ordinary houses. A family might live on the upper floor while operating a bakery, blacksmith shop, textile workshop, or jewelry business below. Some buildings combined homes, stores, warehouses, and manufacturing spaces under one roof. Rather than separating work from daily life, many Romans integrated both into the same building. This discovery transformed historians' understanding of Roman cities. Urban neighborhoods were not divided neatly into residential and commercial areas. Daily life was far more interconnected than previously imagined. The smell of fresh bread, the sound of hammers striking metal, and the activity of merchants could all exist side by side along the same street. Another misconception surrounded Roman sanitation. Ancient Rome became famous for its impressive sewer systems, especially the massive Cloaca Maxima. For centuries, people believed these engineering achievements made Roman cities exceptionally clean. Modern archaeology painted a more balanced picture. Although the Romans developed remarkable drainage systems, sanitation varied enormously from one neighborhood to another. Some districts enjoyed flowing water and well-maintained drains. Others struggled with overflowing waste, standing water, and crowded living conditions. Parasite eggs discovered in ancient latrines revealed that intestinal diseases remain common despite sophisticated infrastructure. Even public baths celebrated for their cleanliness sometimes became places where infections spread because water was not always replaced as frequently as modern observers once assumed. The Romans achieved extraordinary engineering successes, but they did not eliminate every public health problem. Another famous correction involved Roman military camps abandoned after campaigns. Earlier historians often assumed that once a legion departed, a temporary camp simply disappeared. Excavations showed something quite different. Many abandoned camps gradually attracted merchants, craftsmen, families, and retired soldiers. Over time, temporary military sites evolved into permanent civilian settlements. Some eventually became thriving towns and later modern cities. The discovery revealed how military expansion unintentionally encouraged urban development throughout the empire. The army did not merely conquer territory, it often laid the foundations for long-lasting communities. Roman agriculture produced another surprising revision through the study of ancient pollen. At first glance, pollen grains appear almost meaningless, yet preserved inside lake sediments, marshes, and buried soil, they survive for thousands of years. Scientists examining these microscopic remains reconstructed ancient landscapes with remarkable accuracy. Earlier historians believed extensive forests had covered much of the Roman world throughout the imperial period. Pollen evidence showed that many regions experienced large-scale deforestation much earlier than expected. Trees were cleared for agriculture, shipbuilding, mining, fuel, and construction. Entire landscapes changed dramatically under Roman economic activity. The discovery demonstrated that the empire transformed its environment on a scale previously underestimated. One particularly fascinating misconception involved Roman mirrors. Highly polished bronze mirrors discovered in wealthy homes were long interpreted simply as cosmetic tools. Further research suggested additional purposes. Some mirrors accompanied religious rituals. Others appeared in burials as symbolic objects. A number carried engraved images connected with mythology or protection. Rather than serving only practical needs, mirrors sometimes held cultural and spiritual significance.
The same object could function in several different ways depending on its owner. Roman cemeteries continued to surprise archaeologists as scientific methods improved. Earlier excavations focused mainly on valuable grave goods. Modern researchers began paying equal attention to skeletons themselves. Stable isotope analysis revealed what people had eaten during their lives. Chemical traces preserved inside teeth identified where individuals had grown up. DNA studies uncovered family relationships within cemeteries. In several cases, assumptions based on expensive grave goods proved incorrect. Individuals buried with rich possessions were not always local elites. Some had migrated from distant provinces. Others may have received honors because of military service or family connections. The combination of archaeology and biology reshaped the study of Roman society. Another mistaken interpretation involved Roman theaters. Because theaters hosted dramatic performances, historians initially assumed they served entertainment alone. Excavations revealed evidence for political gatherings, civic ceremonies, religious festivals, musical competitions, public speeches, and official announcements. In some communities, theaters became the social heart of the city. They reflected Roman public life in all its complexity. Entertainment represented only one of many functions. One of the greatest changes in recent decades came from underwater archaeology. For centuries, historians depended almost entirely on discoveries made on land. The Mediterranean Sea gradually revealed another world. Shipwrecks preserved cargoes exactly as they had been loaded nearly 2,000 years earlier. Anchors remained in place. Pottery filled storage compartments. Tools rested where sailors had left them. Even food containers survived beneath layers of sand. Each wreck became a time capsule. Some discoveries disproved earlier assumptions about trade routes. Others revealed unexpected commercial links between distant provinces. Still, others demonstrated that certain products traveled far more widely than historians once believed. The sea preserved evidence that the land had long since lost. Perhaps the most important lesson from these discoveries is that archaeology constantly reminds us to remain humble. Every conclusion is provisional. Every interpretation depends upon available evidence. A single inscription can change the date of an emperor's campaign. A single skeleton can reveal migration across continents. A single buried workshop can transform our understanding of an entire neighborhood. The Roman Empire lasted for centuries and stretched across 3 continents. Its people spoke different languages, worshipped different gods, followed different traditions, and lived vastly different lives. No single theory can ever explain such an enormous civilization completely. That is why each new excavation matters. Not because it always confirms what historians already believe, but because it sometimes proves those beliefs wrong. And when that happens, history does not become weaker. It becomes richer, more accurate, and far more fascinating than anyone had imagined. One of the greatest strengths of archaeology is that it never stops asking questions. A discovery celebrated as revolutionary today may be carefully re-examined 20 years later with new technology, better dating methods, or additional evidence from another excavation. Ancient Rome has experienced this process countless times. Each correction has brought historians closer to understanding the real Roman world rather than the one imagined by earlier generations. A fascinating example involves
Roman mosaics depicting wild animals. When these colorful floors were first uncovered, historians assumed they simply reflected the owner's love of hunting or nature. Lions, leopards, bears, deer, birds, and exotic creatures appeared throughout the empire, decorating villas from Britain to North Africa. As more mosaics were compared, scholars noticed repeating themes. Certain animals appeared almost exclusively in dining rooms. Others surrounded fountains or bathhouses. Some represented myths associated with specific gods. Still others symbolized prosperity, courage, victory, or the changing seasons. Rather than being random decorations, many mosaics formed carefully planned visual messages that guests would recognize as they moved through a house. The discovery showed that Roman homeowners communicated ideas through art in ways that modern observers had overlooked. Another long-standing misconception involved Roman merchants. Earlier historians often portrayed long-distance trade as something controlled almost entirely by wealthy elites or the imperial government. Excavated shipwrecks, warehouse records, commercial inscriptions, and contracts suggested a more complicated economy. Independent merchants organized voyages. Family businesses traded across the Mediterranean. Local investors financed commercial expeditions. Guilds helped coordinate production and transportation. Small entrepreneurs played a much larger role than historians once believed. The Roman economy depended not only on imperial authority, but also on countless private individuals willing to take financial risks. Another remarkable correction came from Roman footwear. Shoes recovered from waterlogged archaeological sites initially attracted little attention. To many early excavators, they seemed like ordinary leather objects with limited historical value. Closer examination transformed them into extraordinary evidence. Different occupations required different styles. Children's shoes revealed patterns of growth. Military boots varied according to climate and assignment. Repairs showed that even relatively wealthy Romans often reused footwear rather than discarding it immediately. Some shoes displayed decorative designs that reflected fashion rather than simple practicality. These discoveries reminded historians that even everyday objects could reveal social class, occupation, age, regional identity, and personal taste. One of the most surprising discoveries concerned Roman pets buried beside their owners. For many years, archaeologists interpreted these burials as symbolic offerings connected to religious beliefs. Later evidence suggested that many represented genuine affection. Dogs appeared in epitaphs praising their loyalty. Cats were commemorated with touching inscriptions. Bird cages accompanied carefully buried songbirds. Some owners commissioned small memorial stones expressing grief remarkably similar to modern pet memorials. The stereotype that Romans viewed animals only as tools became increasingly difficult to defend. Archaeology instead revealed relationships filled with companionship, affection, and emotional attachment. Roman glass production also challenged earlier assumptions. Beautiful transparent glass was once thought to be imported mainly from a few specialized workshops in the eastern Mediterranean. Chemical analysis of glass fragments uncovered throughout Europe revealed widespread recycling. Broken vessels were melted down repeatedly. Glass traveled between provinces as raw material. Local workshops produced finished products using imported ingredients. Instead of depending entirely on distant factories, many regions developed flexible manufacturing systems
that reused valuable resources. This discovery highlighted Roman efficiency in ways earlier historians had not appreciated. Another misconception involved Roman writing itself. Classical inscriptions carved into stone often appear neat, symmetrical, and carefully planned. For centuries, these monuments shaped the image of Roman literacy. Excavations uncovered thousands of hastily written messages scratched onto walls, pottery, roof tiles, and wooden tablets. Spelling mistakes appeared frequently. Grammar varied. Local accents influenced written language. Abbreviations filled personal notes. The discovery reminded scholars that ordinary writing differed greatly from formal public inscriptions. Latin, like every living language, existed in many forms. The polished language of official monuments represented only one part of Roman communication. One particularly important correction came through the study of Roman skeletons. Early excavators often estimated age and sex using visual observation alone. Modern forensic anthropology introduced far more accurate techniques. Some skeletons originally identified as male warriors later proved to be female. Others believed to represent adults turned out to be adolescents. Improved analysis corrected burial interpretations across numerous archaeological sites. These revisions affected broader historical conclusions about military service, population structure, migration, and family life. Technology once again demonstrated that small scientific improvements could reshape major historical narratives. Roman ports produced another fascinating surprise. Earlier historians assumed harbors functioned primarily as places where ships loaded and unloaded cargo. Excavations revealed far more complex facilities. Warehouses lined the waterfront, markets operated nearby. Government officials inspected goods, tax collectors recorded shipments, shipbuilders repaired damaged vessels, religious shrines protected sailors before dangerous voyages. Restaurants, taverns, inns, and workshops surrounded the docks. Ports became bustling communities in their own right. They served as economic, administrative, cultural, and social centers connecting distant parts of the empire. Perhaps the greatest misconception corrected by archaeology is the idea that ancient Rome remained unchanged throughout its long history. The Roman Kingdom, the Roman Republic, the early empire, the late empire. Each represented different political systems, economies, cultures, and social conditions. Yet older books sometimes described the Romans as though they all lived the same way for nearly 1,000 years. Modern archaeology has demonstrated continuous change. Fashion evolved. Architecture changed. Religious practices shifted. Trade routes expanded and contracted. Military equipment developed. Cities grew and declined. Languages absorbed new influences. No civilization remains frozen in time. Rome was constantly adapting. That realization may be one of archaeology's greatest achievements. It reminds us that history is not a collection of fixed images. It is the story of people responding to changing circumstances across generations. Every corrected discovery brings that story into sharper focus. The more archaeologists uncover beneath the soil, the more vividly the Roman world comes alive, not as a land of myths and assumptions, but as a complex civilization filled with real people whose lives were far richer and more diverse than anyone once imagined. For much of modern history, people imagined ancient Rome as a civilization that had already revealed most of its secrets. Great monuments had been mapped, famous emperors had been studied, and countless artifacts had filled museums around the world. It seemed as though only small details remained to be discovered.
Archaeology proved otherwise. Again and again, discoveries that once appeared settled were challenged by new evidence. Sometimes the correction came from an entirely new excavation. Other times, the answer had been sitting inside a museum collection for decades, waiting for modern technology to uncover details invisible to earlier researchers. One striking example involved Roman lamps. Thousands of small clay oil lamps have been recovered throughout the former empire. Early archaeologists viewed them simply as practical household objects used to provide light after sunset. As larger collections were studied, researchers began noticing patterns. Some lamps carried images of gods and goddesses. Others showed gladiators, racing horses, mythological creatures, military symbols, or scenes from everyday life. Certain designs appeared only in particular provinces. Others spread across the empire through trade. Some lamps were found almost exclusively inside graves, suggesting symbolic or religious meanings beyond their practical purpose. What once seemed like an ordinary household object became a valuable source of information about belief, identity, commerce, and artistic taste. Another misconception involved Roman coins found far beyond the empire's borders. Earlier, historians believed these coins proved Roman political control over distant regions. The conclusion appeared reasonable. If Roman money existed there, surely Roman authority had reached those places. Modern research offered several alternative explanations. Coins traveled through trade. They passed from merchant to merchant. They were carried by travelers. Some reached foreign communities as diplomatic gifts. Others circulated because people valued their precious metal rather than recognizing the emperor whose portrait appeared on them. Finding Roman coins no longer automatically proved Roman conquest. Instead, each discovery required careful examination of its archaeological context. Roman bridges also underwent significant reinterpretation. Many impressive stone bridges survived for centuries, encouraging historians to believe the Romans preferred stone for nearly every major crossing. Excavations uncovered the remains of numerous wooden bridges that had long since disappeared. Only foundation posts buried in riverbeds survived. This changed historians' understanding of Roman engineering. Stone bridges represented long-term investments along important routes. Wooden bridges offered faster, cheaper solutions where conditions allowed. The Roman Empire relied on a mixture of permanent and temporary engineering rather than a single standard approach. Another fascinating correction came from Roman military equipment. Decorated helmets, shields, and armor displayed in museums often shaped public imagination. People pictured every Roman soldier marching into battle wearing polished metal equipment that looked almost identical. Archaeological excavations painted a more practical picture. Equipment was repaired repeatedly. Damaged armor received patches, helmets were modified, shields were rebuilt. Leather straps replaced worn fittings. Soldiers often adapted their gear according to local conditions and available supplies. Military equipment represented years of careful maintenance rather than constant replacement. The Roman army's strength depended not only on manufacturing but also on efficient repair and reuse. One remarkable discovery involved Roman gardens. Earlier excavations focused primarily on buildings. Open spaces between structures received relatively little attention. Modern environmental archaeology transformed these neglected areas.
pollen analysis, seed remains, root cavities, and irrigation channels revealed carefully designed gardens filled with flowers, fruit trees, herbs, decorative shrubs, and shaded walkways. Some gardens produced food. Others served religious purposes.
Many provided peaceful places for relaxation inside crowded cities. The Romans invested significant effort in shaping natural landscapes as part of everyday urban life. Another misconception surrounded Roman slavery. Older historical accounts sometimes portrayed enslaved people almost exclusively as agricultural laborers working on large estates. Archaeological evidence revealed a far broader reality. Enslaved individuals worked as teachers, accountants, doctors, artists, builders, miners, household servants, craftsmen, secretaries, cooks, and business managers. Some eventually purchased their freedom. Others remained closely involved in commercial enterprises throughout their lives. The institution itself remained deeply unjust, but archaeology demonstrated that enslaved people's experiences varied greatly, depending on occupation, location, education, and household circumstances. Recognizing this diversity helped historians move beyond oversimplified descriptions of Roman society. Roman cemeteries continued challenging assumptions. For many years, isolated graves discovered outside city walls were interpreted as evidence of forgotten villages. Later excavations revealed that some represented roadside burial grounds placed intentionally along major highways. Travelers passing these monuments would read inscriptions commemorating the dead. Families deliberately chose visible locations to preserve memory. The graves were not isolated because settlements had disappeared. They were positioned where the greatest number of people would see them. This discovery revealed the importance Romans placed on remembrance and public identity. One of the most exciting advances came through digital reconstruction. Earlier generations relied on hand-drawn illustrations when rebuilding damaged monuments. Modern laser scanning creates highly accurate three-dimensional models. Researchers can test different architectural theories without altering the original ruins. Sometimes digital reconstruction confirms earlier ideas. In other cases, it exposes impossible roof designs, incorrect wall heights, or unrealistic stairways proposed decades earlier. Computer modeling has corrected numerous misunderstandings about Roman buildings while preserving fragile archaeological remains. Perhaps the greatest lesson from these discoveries is that archaeology is not about proving old ideas correct. It is about following evidence wherever it leads. Some famous theories survive, others disappear. Neither outcome represents failure. Science progresses by questioning itself. Ancient Rome continues to fascinate because every generation inherits new tools, asks new questions, and uncovers new evidence. A fragment of pottery, a buried inscription, a forgotten workshop, a worn leather shoe, a single seed trapped beneath an ancient floor. Each has the potential to change history. The Roman world still lies beneath fields, forests, rivers, deserts, and modern cities. Every excavation reminds us that countless stories remain hidden below the ground. And somewhere, perhaps only a few meters beneath the surface, another discovery is waiting to overturn another assumption that historians once believed beyond doubt. The history of ancient Rome has never been a finished book. Every generation opens another chapter by asking questions that previous generations never thought to ask. Archaeologists today possess technologies that early excavators could scarcely imagine.
Satellite imagery can detect buried buildings from space. Ground-penetrating radar can reveal hidden structures without digging. DNA analysis can identify family relationships that remained invisible for 2,000 years. Microscopic chemical testing can determine what food was cooked inside a broken pot centuries ago. These advances have corrected countless misunderstandings about the Roman world. One particularly interesting example involves Roman statues of emperors. For a long time, historians assumed that every statue discovered in an ancient city represented the emperor who ruled when the statue was first erected. That idea appeared perfectly reasonable. An emperor commissioned a statue. The statue remained standing. Future generations admired it. Simple enough. Archaeologists eventually discovered evidence that many statues experienced entirely different histories. When a new emperor came to power, sculptors sometimes removed the head of an older statue and replaced it with the face of the new ruler. The body remained the same, only the portrait changed. This practice saved both time and money because carving an entirely new statue required enormous effort. As a result, some statues displayed bodies created decades before the faces attached to them. What appeared to be a single work of art actually represented two different historical periods. The discovery reminded scholars that Roman monuments often evolved rather than remaining unchanged. Another misconception involved Roman schools. Earlier historians believed formal education existed mainly for wealthy boys preparing for careers in politics. Excavations uncovered writing tablets, ink pots, styluses, and school exercises in a surprising variety of locations. Graffiti written by children practicing letters appeared on walls. Simple arithmetic problems survived on broken pottery. Teachers' corrections could still be seen on wax tablets. Evidence suggested that elementary education reached more children than historians had once assumed, although opportunities remained unequal and depended greatly on wealth and location. Learning was woven into everyday Roman life in more ways than written sources alone had suggested. Roman warehouses also challenged older assumptions. Large storage buildings discovered near ports were initially believed to hold only grain. Chemical analysis of residues preserved inside storage jars revealed a far more diverse picture. Wine, olive oil, fish sauce, dried fruit, nuts, spices, honey, salted meat, textiles, glass, metal tools. Warehouses served as distribution centers for an astonishing range of goods moving across the empire. This discovery highlighted the remarkable complexity of Roman logistics. Millions of people depended upon carefully organized systems capable of transporting products over enormous distances. Another famous correction concerned Roman maps. For centuries, scholars relied heavily on surviving ancient maps to reconstruct the empire. Modern archaeology revealed that many roads, settlements, and fortifications never appeared on those maps at all. Some maps emphasized symbolic importance rather than geographical accuracy. Others reflected political priorities. They were not intended to function exactly like modern atlases. As archaeologists uncovered forgotten towns and roads missing from ancient documents, they realized written records alone could never provide a complete picture of the Roman landscape. The ground itself preserved information absent from surviving texts. One particularly fascinating area involved Roman perfumes. Beautiful glass bottles found inside graves were once displayed as decorative containers,
Scientists later examined microscopic residues trapped inside them. They identified traces of plant oils, flower extracts, tree resins, spices, and aromatic herbs. Researchers even reconstructed several ancient fragrance recipes using evidence from both archaeology and surviving Roman writings. The bottles ceased to be merely attractive artifacts. They became evidence of sophisticated manufacturing techniques, long-distance trade, and everyday personal care. Roman construction sites produced another surprising revision. Earlier historians imagined that, once builders completed a temple, bathhouse, or forum, the structure remained largely unchanged until it eventually fell into ruin. Excavation revealed constant modification. Rooms were enlarged, walls were moved, floors were repaired, roofs were replaced, windows were added, drainage systems improved. Buildings adapted to changing needs over decades or even centuries. Rather than preserving static monuments, Roman cities continually rebuilt themselves. The urban landscape remained dynamic throughout the empire's history. Another mistaken belief involved Roman doctors. Earlier accounts often portrayed medicine as sharply divided between scientific physicians and religious healers. Archaeological discoveries suggested a more blended reality. Medical instruments appeared near religious shrines. Healing sanctuaries contained evidence of practical treatments. Written prescriptions mentioned both herbal remedies and prayers. Patients often sought help from multiple traditions simultaneously. The Romans did not always separate medicine and religion in the way modern societies often do. Their understanding of health reflected a combination of practical observation, inherited knowledge, and spiritual belief. One of the greatest surprises came from the study of Roman handwriting. Stone inscriptions display elegant, carefully carved letters that influenced modern alphabets. Personal letters looked completely different. Rapid handwriting varied enormously between individuals. Abbreviations filled private correspondence. Some handwriting proved remarkably neat. Other examples appeared rushed and difficult, even for specialists to interpret. The discovery reminded historians that official writing represented only one small part of everyday literacy. Real people wrote quickly, made mistakes, crossed out words, and developed personal writing styles much like people today. Perhaps the most profound correction concerns the Roman Empire itself. Earlier generations often describe Rome as though it functioned as a perfectly organized machine directed effortlessly from the capital. Modern archaeology paints a far more human picture. Local officials solved local problems. Communities adapted imperial policies to regional traditions. Buildings reflected available materials. Trade adjusted to changing conditions. Military commanders made practical decisions based on local realities. The empire succeeded not because everything remained perfectly standardized, but because it possessed extraordinary flexibility. That flexibility allowed Rome to govern vast territories for centuries, despite enormous cultural diversity. Every corrected discovery teaches the same lesson. History becomes stronger when assumptions are questioned. Evidence deserves careful examination. Even the most famous artifacts may still hold secrets waiting for future generations to uncover. Ancient Rome continues to surprise the modern world because its story has never truly been finished. Every excavation writes another page. Every scientific breakthrough reveals another forgotten detail.
And every mistaken interpretation corrected by archaeology brings us one step closer to understanding one of humanity's greatest civilizations as it really existed. The deeper historians explore ancient Rome, the clearer it becomes that archaeology is not simply about uncovering buried objects, it is about uncovering buried assumptions. Every generation inherits ideas from those who came before, and every generation has the responsibility to test those ideas against new evidence. Some survive that test, others do not. One remarkable example involves Roman temples. For many years, archaeologists believed that nearly every temple followed a single architectural tradition inspired by the great monuments of Rome itself. When similar foundations appeared during excavations, they were often identified as religious buildings almost immediately. As excavation methods improved, researchers began noticing inconsistencies. Some structures lacked altars. Others contained storage rooms far larger than expected. Several buildings once described as temples produced evidence of administrative records, commercial activity, or civic meetings instead of religious ceremonies. In some cases, entire buildings had changed purpose over time. A temple might later become a meeting hall. A warehouse could eventually be converted into a shrine. The discovery reminded historians that ancient buildings often enjoyed long and complicated lives. Their function could change dramatically across generations. Another long-standing misconception involved Roman prisons. Popular imagination often pictures Roman cities filled with permanent prisons similar to modern correctional facilities. Archaeological evidence tells a different story. The Romans certainly detained criminals and political prisoners, but long-term imprisonment was relatively uncommon compared with many modern legal systems. Many holding cells functioned only as temporary places where individuals waited for trial, punishment, or execution. Justice focused more heavily on fines, exile, forced labor, corporal punishment, or public penalties than on lengthy prison sentences. Several underground rooms once labeled prisons were later identified as storage vaults or service areas after closer examination. This correction changed how historians understood Roman law and punishment. One particularly fascinating discovery involved Roman timekeeping. Sundials are among the most recognizable scientific instruments from the ancient world. Earlier historians assumed that most Romans relied almost entirely on these devices to measure time. Excavations suggested a more complex reality. Water clocks appeared in public buildings. Military camps maintained carefully organized schedules independent of sunlight. Workshops followed practical routines based on daylight rather than exact hours. Different regions adapted timekeeping according to climate, season, and occupation. The Roman concept of an hour itself changed throughout the year because daylight hours were divided differently in summer and winter. The discovery demonstrated that Roman daily life operated according to rhythms very different from the fixed 24-hour schedules familiar today. Another mistaken assumption concerned Roman entertainment outside the great cities. Earlier research concentrated heavily on Rome, Pompeii, and other famous urban centers. As archaeologists excavated smaller towns, they uncovered theaters, bathhouses, gaming boards, carved into stone benches, public gardens, taverns, and sports facilities. Entertainment was not limited to the capital. Even relatively modest communities invested in public spaces where people could gather, socialize, compete, and celebrate festivals. The Roman lifestyle spread far beyond the great imperial cities. One of the most important corrections came through the study of ancient climate. For generations, historians treated weather as little more than background scenery. Modern environmental archaeology transformed that perspective. Tree rings, lake sediments, ice cores, and pollen records revealed periods of drought, unusually cold winters, floods, and changing rainfall patterns during Roman history. Some agricultural declines once blamed entirely on political failure now appeared connected to environmental stress. Trade routes adjusted as river levels changed. Harvests fluctuated with climate. The Roman Empire was influenced not only by emperors and armies, but also by forces beyond human control. This broader understanding connected archaeology with climate science in ways unimaginable a century ago. Roman coins continued to surprise researchers. Earlier excavators often cleaned coins aggressively to reveal portraits and inscriptions. Modern conservation techniques preserved tiny traces of dirt, corrosion, and chemical deposits. These seemingly insignificant materials sometimes revealed where coins had circulated, how they had been buried, or what kind of containers once held them. Even the soil attached to an artifact became valuable evidence. The lesson was profound. Nothing recovered from an archaeological site is truly insignificant. Context matters as much as the object itself. One particularly moving discovery involved Roman family life. For many years, official inscriptions gave the impression that Roman society revolved almost entirely around political achievement and military success. Ordinary grave markers told another story. Parents mourned children who died young. Husbands praised devoted wives. Wives remembered beloved husbands. Brothers honored sisters. Friends commemorated lifelong companions. The language carved into stone expressed love, grief, hope, and memory in deeply human ways. These inscriptions reminded historians that behind every emperor, every legion, and every monument lived ordinary families whose emotions were remarkably familiar. Perhaps the greatest misconception corrected by archaeology is the belief that ancient Rome was somehow completely understood. Every decade proves otherwise. Entire neighborhoods remain buried beneath modern cities. Shipwrecks still rest on the floor of the Mediterranean. Remote frontier forts continue emerging from forests and deserts. New technologies reveal details invisible only a generation ago. Ancient DNA continues reshaping our understanding of migration. Chemical analysis uncovers forgotten trade networks. Digital imaging makes faded inscriptions readable once again. The Roman world still has countless stories waiting beneath the soil. That is what makes its history so extraordinary. It is not a finished story. It is an ongoing investigation. Every corrected mistake strengthens historical knowledge. Every revised theory demonstrates the power of scientific inquiry. Every new excavation reminds us that the past is far more complex than simple legends or popular myths. Ancient Rome remains one of humanity's greatest civilizations, not because it was perfect, but because its surviving evidence continues challenging modern assumptions. The ruins have not finished speaking. The artifacts have not revealed every secret. And somewhere beneath ancient streets, forgotten villas, abandoned forts, and buried ports, another discovery is waiting to prove that even our current understanding may one day be revised. As we reach the end of this journey, one truth stands above all the discoveries, debates, and corrections.
Ancient Rome has never truly stopped teaching us, even though nearly 2,000 years have passed since the empire reached the height of its power. Its ruins continue to challenge modern assumptions. Every generation believes it understands Rome a little better than the last. Yet every generation also discovers that some of its most confident conclusions were incomplete. That is not a weakness of history. It is its greatest strength. Unlike myths, history is not meant to remain unchanged forever. It grows stronger every time new evidence replaces old assumptions. Throughout this series, we have explored discoveries that were once accepted as fact but later proved to be misunderstood or only partially correct. White marble statues were once believed to represent Roman artistic taste until traces of ancient pigments revealed a world filled with brilliant colors. Villas thought to be luxurious country homes turned out to be busy agricultural and industrial centers. Roads believed to lead only toward Rome became part of a far more complicated transportation network. Amphitheaters famous for gladiator fights proved to be multi-purpose public spaces, serving many roles within Roman society. Even everyday objects changed our understanding of history. Broken pottery revealed forgotten trade routes. Cooking vessels preserved microscopic traces of ancient meals. Children's toys reminded us that Roman families laughed, played, and mourned much as families do today. Graffiti scratched onto walls allowed ordinary people to speak across 20 centuries with jokes, complaints, advertisements, declarations of love, and political opinions. These were not the voices of emperors. They were the voices of ordinary Romans. Perhaps that is archaeology's greatest achievement. It gives history back to the people who actually lived it. For a long time, Roman history focused primarily on emperors, generals, senators, and monumental architecture. Modern archaeology has broadened that picture enormously. Farmers, craftsmen, merchants, teachers, doctors, children, mothers, soldiers stationed far from home, freed slaves beginning new lives, travelers crossing distant frontiers. All of them helped build the civilization we now call ancient Rome. Their stories survived not in grand monuments alone, but in simple objects buried beneath layers of earth. One shoe, one coin, one broken cup, one handwritten letter, one forgotten grave, one damaged wall. Each contributed another small piece to an enormous historical puzzle. Scientific advances continue accelerating this process. Ground-penetrating radar reveals buried buildings without excavation. LiDAR uncovers roads hidden beneath forests. Ancient DNA reconstructs family relationships and migration patterns. Chemical analysis identifies the contents of sealed containers. Microscopic pollen recreates vanished landscapes. Digital imaging recovers faded inscriptions once considered unreadable. Every new technique gives archaeologists another opportunity to revisit discoveries made decades or even centuries earlier. Sometimes those discoveries remain exactly as historians first understood them. Sometimes they change completely. That willingness to question old conclusions is one of archaeology's defining principles. No interpretation is beyond reconsideration. Evidence always comes first. Ancient Rome itself also teaches another important lesson. The empire was never as uniform as popular imagination often suggests. People living in Britain experienced Roman rule differently from those living in Egypt. Citizens in Spain followed customs unlike those in Syria. North African cities developed their own traditions. local cultures blended with Roman influence in countless unique ways. The empire succeeded not because everyone became identical, but because diversity became one of its defining characteristics. Understanding that diversity required archaeologists to move beyond simple explanations. The Roman world was too vast and too complex for easy answers. It remains so today. Perhaps somewhere beneath a modern city street lies a forgotten temple, waiting to rewrite religious history. Perhaps an untouched shipwreck on the Mediterranean seabed preserves cargo capable of revealing unknown trade routes. Perhaps an unread inscription hidden inside a museum storage room contains the name of a governor, merchant, or emperor lost to history. Perhaps an excavation beginning tomorrow will overturn another idea that scholars currently accept with confidence. That possibility is what makes archaeology so exciting. The past is never completely silent. It continues speaking to those willing to listen carefully. Ancient Rome reminds us that certainty should always be accompanied by curiosity. The greatest historians are not those who refuse to change their minds. They are those who follow evidence wherever it leads. Sometimes the evidence confirms old beliefs. Sometimes it destroys them. Either outcome brings us closer to the truth. As long as ruins remain buried beneath the soil, as long as forgotten artifacts wait inside ancient walls, and as long as new scientific methods continue to develop, the story of ancient Rome will never truly end. There will always be another excavation, another inscription, another skeleton, another road, another villa, another mystery, and perhaps another discovery that proves everything we thought we knew was only part of a much larger story. Thank you for joining this journey through the fascinating world of ancient Roman discoveries that were proven wrong. The Roman Empire may have fallen centuries ago, but its secrets continue to shape our understanding of history, and they almost certainly will for generations to come.